There is a strange and haunting phenomenon that occurs when one begins to awaken, not in the spiritual sense that is often romanticized, but in the deeper psychological sense of truly seeing, when you begin to perceive the hidden mechanics of human behavior, the masks people wear, the unspoken fears that govern societies. You stop being part of the comfortable illusion. And the moment that happens, something subtle yet profound shifts. The world begins to turn against you. Not because you have done wrong, but because you have become a mirror, a living reflection of what others refuse to see within themselves. Human beings carry within them an invisible twin, the denied self, the shadow. It is made of everything that consciousness rejects: anger, envy, greed, shame, fear, lust, pride, and all the primitive instincts that civilization has taught us to suppress. But what is repressed does not disappear. It waits. It hides behind the smile, beneath the tone of virtue, within the polished mask of morality. And when someone appears who unconsciously triggers this hidden reservoir, someone unafraid to show what others conceal, that suppressed energy bursts forth as judgment, hatred, or projection. In essence, when the world hates you for simply being yourself, it is often not you they are hating. It is their own disowned nature that they see mirrored back through your presence. Your authenticity becomes unbearable to those still living behind illusions. You represent the truth of what they've buried, and truth is intolerable to those who have built their lives on denial. The collective, unable to face its own corruption, projects it outward onto a scapegoat, an outsider, a rebel, a truth teller. This has happened in every age. Those who reveal truth become villains in the eyes of those who worship lies. The collective shadow is not abstract. It operates through people, through families, through entire systems. It manifests in gossip, in public outrage, in moral crusades, in digital mobs pretending to defend virtue while secretly satisfying the dark urge to destroy. It hides behind righteousness and attacks with moral fury. But beneath the surface, the motive is rarely justice. It is unconscious self, hatred redirected outward. The world needs villains, not because it wishes to punish evil, but because it cannot bear to confront its own darkness. So it creates external enemies to justify its inner avoidance. If you become that enemy, if your presence disrupts the shared dream, you will feel the cold weight of collective disapproval. It may come as whispers behind your back, subtle exclusions, false accusations, or even direct hostility. And yet, the more you resist conforming, the more their projections intensify. You may start to question yourself, wondering if you truly are what they say you are. But this is the trap. The moment you internalize their projection, you step away from your own center and begin living through the eyes of others. You become haunted by reflections that never belong to you. The challenge is to remain conscious while being misperceived, to understand that hatred, when undeserved, is information. It reveals the shadow dynamics at play. Those who despise you without cause are rarely responding to you as an individual. They are responding to a part of themselves that your presence awakens. You become an archetype in their inner theater, perhaps the betrayer, the deceiver, the outcast, or the sinner, whatever figure they must confront in their own psyche. And in this way, you become a psychological mirror for the collective unconscious. To stand as that mirror is not easy. It demands inner solidity, self-knowledge, and the courage to withstand emotional isolation. You cannot fight the collective shadow with anger, for that only feeds it. Nor can you hide, for hiding strengthens the lie that you are what they imagine you to be. The task is to observe, to understand, and to hold your integrity in silence, to know that what others project is not your burden to carry. The collective shadow feeds on reaction. It grows stronger through conflict and fear. But when you stand still, unmoved, aware of the deeper truth, the projection begins to lose its power. In such moments, solitude becomes a sacred practice. You begin to see that the rejection of the world is not punishment, it is purification. Each act of misunderstanding removes those who cannot see you as you are. It is the stripping away of illusion, both theirs and your own. The mirror, though lonely, is not without purpose. Through it, truth reflects itself back into the world, and slowly, painfully, it transforms. The world's hatred then becomes a strange kind of grace. It forces you to detach from the need to be liked, to step beyond the fragile structures of belonging built on falsehood. You begin to understand that the approval of the unconscious is not worth earning. That to be hated by the asleep may be the only proof that you are awake. And in that awakening, you begin to see the larger game being played, humanity's endless attempt to escape itself. The wars, the prejudice, the cruelty, the envy, all of it fragments of a psyche at war with its own reflection. And so, when the world turns against you, you must ask not, why me? But what am I showing them? For every accusation contains revelation. Every judgment points to a fear unhealed. Every outburst of hostility carries within it the trembling voice of a shadow begging to be seen. The one who sees this clearly no longer lives as a victim of the world's projections, but as an observer of its unconscious play. The hatred directed toward you becomes insight, the rejection becomes initiation, the darkness of others becomes the raw material of your own awakening. There comes a time in every honest life when authenticity becomes exile. The more you live in truth, the more alien you become to those who survive through masks. To be authentic in a world addicted to performance is to be dangerous, for authenticity is not polite. It exposes, it shines light on the pretenses people protect, the false selves they have carefully constructed to belong. When you speak truthfully, without rehearsed smiles or social camouflage, you remind others of the courage they abandoned long ago. And in their discomfort, they do not celebrate you. They turn away. The exile begins quietly. A strange silence surrounds you. The conversations that once felt warm begin to freeze. Invitations grow fewer. Compliments turn into caution. You start to feel as though your honesty contaminates the atmosphere, as if your mere presence disturbs an invisible order. That's because it does. The social world depends on mutual illusions, an agreement that we will not see each other too clearly. It runs on polite denial. And when someone breaks that contract, when someone chooses truth over performance, the entire illusion trembles. Authenticity is rebellion in its purest form. It doesn't need to shout or resist outwardly. It simply refuses to lie. Yet that refusal is enough to make you an outcast. The system of appearances cannot tolerate the genuine. People often say they want honesty, but what they really want is comfort. They want validation dressed as truth. When you speak without flattery, when you move without pretense, when you refuse to participate in gossip, manipulation, or emotional theater, you disrupt the collective rhythm. You become the discordant note in a song everyone else pretends to enjoy. The authentic person doesn't fit neatly into social categories. They are too sincere for manipulation, too silent for spectacle, too grounded for conformity. Their very stillness exposes the restless desperation of others. The world built upon image cannot process the depth of someone who no longer wishes to impress it. And so it labels them as arrogant, difficult, aloof, or weird. These are the words the unconscious uses when it cannot control someone. It is not your behavior that threatens people. It is your independence. To live authentically means you have stopped living through borrowed opinions. You no longer adjust your tone to match the expectations of others. You do not shrink to avoid conflict. You have burned the masks and accepted the consequences. That decision is liberation, but also exile. You begin to walk through the world unseen, or rather, misseen. People project onto you the parts of themselves they cannot integrate. Your quiet self, respect appears as arrogance. Your boundaries are called cruelty. Your solitude is mistaken for sadness. Yet beneath these misunderstandings lies something holy, the preservation of your inner truth. This exile, painful as it is, becomes a form of purification. It strips away every false attachment, every friendship built on convenience, every relationship sustained by illusion. You begin to see who loved your essence and who only loved your compliance. Those who required your silence vanish when you begin to speak. Those who admired your light disappear when it shines on their shadows. This shedding is not cruelty, it is clarity. For truth has a gravity of its own. It pulls away everything that cannot stay near it. In the loneliness that follows, something new is born. You begin to discover the depth of your own company. You learn to enjoy silence, to find nourishment in solitude, to feel at home in your own mind. The absence of false companionship reveals a strange peace, a quiet not of isolation, but of integrity. You realize that most human gatherings are not connections, but collisions of personas. Without the performance, there is space to breathe. Without the mask, there is room to feel. The exile of authenticity also reveals the psychology of the collective. Most people cling to their personas because they fear annihilation. They believe that without approval, they will cease to exist. Their sense of worth is tied to belonging, and belonging demands compliance. So when you refuse to play the same game, you awaken their deepest anxiety, the fear of seeing how empty their performance truly is. Your authenticity reminds them of everything they have sacrificed for acceptance. They envy your courage, but cannot face their cowardice, so they call you selfish. They confuse freedom with arrogance because they have forgotten what freedom feels like. The authentic life is not glamorous. It does not promise admiration or comfort. It promises truth, and truth burns. It will strip away illusions of who you thought you were and who you thought others were. It will test your endurance, your faith, your sense of identity. Yet through that burning, something unbreakable emerges, a self that no longer depends on the gaze of others. You start to live from an inner axis instead of external validation. The exile becomes sanctuary. To live this way requires immense courage. It means standing in the storm of misunderstanding without seeking shelter in conformity. It means being willing to be disliked, misread, even hated for the sake of inner alignment. The authentic person is never truly alone, though it may seem so because they walk in the presence of truth. The world may reject them, but existence itself seems to honor their presence. Nature does not demand a mask. Silence does not require performance. The stars do not ask you to pretend. In the deeper order of things, authenticity is not exile, it is home. Yet among people, it will always carry a price. You cannot be both true and universally accepted. You cannot serve both the self and the collective illusion. You must choose between belonging to the world or belonging to your soul. And once you choose the latter, the world will sense it. It will test your resolve through misunderstanding, rejection, and distortion. It will tempt you to return to the comfort of the mask. But something within you will know that returning would mean death, not of the body, but of the spirit. For once you have seen truth, pretending becomes impossible. There is a silence that does not come from the absence of sound, but from the absence of belonging. It arrives when the world no longer recognizes you, when familiar faces grow distant, and when your words fall into voids of misunderstanding. This silence is not accidental. It is initiation. Isolation, though often mistaken for punishment, is one of the oldest rites of transformation known to the human soul. It strips away the noise of the collective, forcing you to face what you truly are without distraction, without validation, without the comforting mirrors of social identity. Every great transformation begins with separation. Before the soul can be reborn, it must first die to what it has been. The people who once defined you must fade. The ambitions that once guided you must dissolve. The world that once seemed stable begins to collapse, and you stand alone in the wreckage of your former life. It is there, in the raw stillness of isolation, that the deeper initiation begins. You are no longer nourished by the approval of others. You begin to feel the hunger of the spirit, a craving not for company, but for meaning. In the early stages of isolation, the mind rebels. It searches desperately for connection, for reassurance that it is still loved, still relevant, still seen. It mistakes solitude for abandonment and begins to spiral into self-doubt. You wonder what you did wrong, why people turned away, why the world has gone silent. But as time unfolds, a strange truth emerges. Nothing has gone wrong. The world has simply stepped aside to allow you to meet yourself. Human beings often cling to one another to avoid that meeting. Relationships, work, entertainment, all can become disguises for fear of solitude. But isolation removes the disguises. It dismantles your identity piece by piece until only the essence remains. The masks you wore to belong no longer make sense. The opinions that once shaped your self-image lose their power. Without the audience of the world, you begin to ask a question you've avoided your entire life. Who am I when no one is watching? That question is the threshold of initiation. When you stand there, you begin to sense that isolation is not emptiness but space, sacred, vast, and alive. In that space, the fragments of the self begin to surface, the forgotten passions, the unhealed wounds, the suppressed fears. There is nowhere left to hide. The quiet becomes a mirror, reflecting everything you have avoided seeing. You meet your shadow, the pain you once projected onto others, the guilt you buried beneath ambition, the grief you disguised as strength. Isolation forces honesty. It is the ultimate mirror, one that never lies. Yet, as painful as this confrontation is, it also brings clarity. You begin to see how much of your life was built around fear. The fear of being unseen, unloved, unwanted. You realize that much of what you called connection was merely an exchange of illusions. You were not relating, you were performing. Isolation reveals this truth without mercy, but also without malice. It is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to return you to what is real. There is a sacred intelligence in the architecture of solitude. When the world withdraws, it creates the conditions for inner awakening. The noise of others drowns the voice of intuition. Isolation amplifies it. What once felt like loss slowly reveals itself as invitation. The invitation to become whole. You learn to generate your own warmth instead of depending on external affection. You learn to see without the filters of collective opinion. You begin to recognize that solitude is not the absence of love, but the purification of it. In isolation, you encounter the raw texture of existence. You start to notice the smallest things, the rhythm of your breath, the movement of light across the walls, the subtle pulse of life beneath every moment. Time slows down. The self becomes transparent. You no longer seek meaning in the world. You begin to feel meaning within. What once felt like exile begins to resemble initiation, a sacred training in self, sufficiency, inner alignment, and spiritual maturity. Every mystic, every thinker, every person who has truly seen beyond the surface of life has passed through this gate. Isolation is the crucible that burns away dependency, fear, and illusion. It does not reward comfort, it rewards awareness. Those who try to escape it return to the world unchanged, still hungry for validation, still dependent on noise to feel alive. But those who surrender to it discover a strange paradox. The deeper they go into solitude, the more connected they become, not to people, but to everything. Isolation refines perception. You begin to see the interconnectedness of all things. The same energy that moves through your loneliness moves through the trees, the sky, the silence itself. You begin to sense that you are not separate, but part of a vast and living intelligence that has always been there, waiting for you to listen. What once felt like emptiness begins to feel like presence. The void reveals itself as fullness. This is the essence of initiation, to move from the illusion of separation to the realization of unity. But it cannot be taught through words or rituals alone. It must be lived through the stripping away of everything familiar. The loneliness that once felt unbearable becomes sacred ground. You begin to understand that isolation was never against you. It was guiding you inward, toward the center of your being, where no rejection can reach and no illusion can survive. In that stillness, the outer world loses its authority. You no longer seek permission to exist. You no longer chase acceptance. You no longer shape yourself to fit what others demand. You stand quietly aware, rooted in an invisible strength that comes from direct contact with truth. You start to realize that the real purpose of isolation is not to separate you from others, but to reunite you with yourself. And once that reunion happens, you see that you were never truly alone at all, only unaware of the vastness that lived within you all along. There is a moment in human evolution when the desire to be liked dies. Not through bitterness, not through pride, but through exhaustion. The soul grows tired of begging for mirrors that only distort its reflection. It grows weary of performing, of bending, of reshaping itself to please a world that never truly sees. That moment, when you finally stop chasing approval, is not a collapse, but a quiet awakening. You begin to see that the need to be liked was never love, it was fear. It was the fear of being invisible, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of existing without validation. But the truth waits on the other side of that fear, patient and eternal. You were never meant to be understood by everyone, only by yourself. From childhood, We are conditioned to equate approval with safety. A smile means we are good, a frown means we are wrong. We learn to shape our behavior around reward and rejection until our sense of self becomes externalized. We begin to live through the gaze of others, adjusting our light so it does not blind, muting our voice so it does not offend. Slowly, authenticity becomes performance, and the soul begins to suffocate beneath the weight of expectation. To transcend this conditioning is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of remembering. It is remembering that your worth was never dependent on applause, that your essence does not need permission to exist. Approval is the currency of the unconscious world. It is traded like gold among those who fear their own silence. People chase it because it gives the illusion of belonging, but belonging achieved through conformity is not connection. It is captivity. To be loved for what you pretend to be is to be unloved entirely. The world rewards masks because masks maintain the illusion of order. But the moment you remove yours, the game changes. The same faces that once smiled at you will look away. The same hands that once clapped will fall still. You will feel the chill of disapproval, not because you have done wrong, but because you have become free. Freedom is unsettling to those who live in cages of validation. Your indifference to their opinions threatens the structure of their reality. They will call you cold, distant, or arrogant. But what they really mean is that you are beyond control. The person who no longer seeks approval cannot be manipulated. They are not swayed by flattery or wounded by rejection. Their compass points inward. They live according to truth, not applause. And truth, by its nature, is indifferent to popularity. It does not bend to please the crowd. It simply is. The transcendence beyond approval begins when you realize that the opinions of others are reflections of their own unresolved conflicts. Praise and criticism come from the same place. The projection of the observer's shadow. The one who praises you sees in you what they wish to become. The one who condemns you sees in you what they fear to admit. Both are illusions. Both are distortions. To live for either is to live in exile from your own soul. The task is not to seek better opinions, but to detach from opinion itself. In this detachment, something profound occurs. You begin to experience a silence that is not loneliness, but sovereignty. You start to act without hesitation, to speak without calculation, to live without the invisible audience that once haunted your every move. You no longer shrink from judgment or inflate from praise. You move through the world like the wind, present, ungraspable, free. The approval of others becomes background noise, faint and irrelevant. You start to see that the world's acceptance was never the measure of truth, only the measure of conformity. Yet, this transcendence does not come without suffering. The withdrawal from external validation feels like withdrawal from a drug. There is an ache, a restlessness, a longing for the old comfort of being seen. You may feel invisible for a while, as though you no longer exist in the collective imagination. But invisibility, in truth, is the beginning of liberation. It is the space where you rediscover the self that was never for show. The part of you that existed before you learned to please. In that space, you begin to feel a quiet power rising. A power not of dominance, but of clarity. The kind of power that no one can give or take away because it no longer depends on permission. This is the birth of inner authority. When you no longer look outward for confirmation, you start to listen inward for alignment. The compass shifts from external validation to internal truth. Every decision becomes a reflection of integrity rather than fear. You stop asking, will they approve? And start asking, is this real for me? That single shift changes everything. You begin to act from a place of being rather than performance. You live not to impress but to express. You move not to prove but to align. The transcendence beyond approval also transforms relationships. You no longer engage in emotional negotiations disguised as love. You no longer beg to be understood or compromise your essence to avoid rejection. You meet others from the same frequency of wholeness. There is no manipulation, no dependency, no fear. There is simply recognition. One soul seeing another without distortion. And if recognition does not come, you no longer suffer for it. You understand that not being seen by the blind is not rejection. It is reality. In this state, you start to see that approval was never love, it was transaction. True love does not demand performance. It does not punish authenticity or silence individuality. It allows you to exist exactly as you are. The transcendence beyond approval is, therefore, the gateway to real love. Love that arises not from need, but from wholeness. When you reach this point, even loneliness changes texture. It is no longer the ache of absence, but the fullness of presence. You feel complete within yourself, connected not to people's perceptions, but to the pulse of existence itself. And slowly, without effort, you realize that those who are meant to see you will see you. Not the mask, but the essence. Their recognition will not feel like approval, it will feel like peace. You will no longer crave to be liked, for you will have remembered what it means to be real. There comes a point in every inner journey when the darkness you have long suppressed begins to stir. It does not ask politely to be seen, it erupts. It moves through your thoughts, your emotions, your dreams, and your relationships, demanding acknowledgement. This uprising of the repressed is what many call breakdown, crisis, or chaos, but beneath those names lies something deeper, rebellion. The shadow, long exiled to the basement of the psyche, begins to revolt against the false image you've built to survive. It refuses to remain silent. It refuses to remain buried. And though this rebellion feels destructive, it is, in truth, the first step toward inner integration. Every human being carries a shadow, the unaccepted parts of the self that were banished in childhood. We were taught which emotions were good and which were bad, which behaviors earned love and which provoked punishment. So we buried the parts that didn't fit. The anger, the envy, the desire for power, the hunger for freedom, all were locked away so that we could belong. But repression has consequences. What is denied does not disappear, it festers. It waits, it watches, it builds pressure beneath the surface of the personality until one day it explodes through the cracks. The polite self can only hold the mask for so long before the forgotten self demands to be seen. This rebellion often begins subtly, a restlessness you cannot explain, a surge of irritation toward people who once never bothered you, sudden bursts of emotion, rage, jealousy, sadness, that seem disproportionate to the moment. You try to suppress them, to return to the calm facade that once worked, but it no longer holds. The shadow has grown too strong. Every attempt to repress it now feels like betrayal. What you once controlled now begins to control you. The rebellion intensifies when the outer world mirrors your inner conflict. Relationships begin to fracture Work becomes meaningless, and old identities crumble. You may feel attacked by circumstances, but life is only responding to the rebellion within. The world reflects the civil war of your psyche. You are being forced to confront the parts of yourself you have ignored. The anger you denied begins to appear in others. The fear you avoided surrounds you. The shadow is not trying to destroy your life. It is trying to reclaim it. It wants wholeness. It wants balance. And to achieve that, it must first dismantle the illusion of perfection that has kept you divided. During this stage, the temptation to retreat into old defenses is strong. You may seek distraction, denial, or spiritual bypassing to escape the discomfort. But the more you avoid the rebellion, the louder it becomes. The shadow does not negotiate, it insists. It pushes you toward confrontation with brutal honesty. It makes you feel emotions you were taught to fear. It exposes motives you never admitted to yourself. It reveals the truth that beneath your morality lies instinct, and beneath your civility lies hunger. This revelation is not corruption. It is realism. It is the recognition that light and darkness are not enemies, but halves of a greater whole. As the rebellion unfolds, you begin to see that the shadow's energy is not inherently destructive. It is creative when integrated. The very rage you feared contains vitality. The envy you denied hides ambition. The fear you buried guards wisdom. Every emotion you suppressed carries life force, waiting to be reclaimed and rechanneled. The shadow rebels not to punish you, but to return your stolen energy. It tears down illusions so that something authentic can emerge. The self that survives this rebellion is no longer a mask of moral correctness, but a living paradox. Both sinner and saint, both fragile and fierce. To allow this process is to surrender control. The ego, which thrives on stability, will resist. It will fight to maintain its authority, insisting that the eruption of the shadow is wrong, dangerous, shameful. But the deeper truth is that the ego's resistance is the very source of suffering. The rebellion hurts only because you are fighting your own liberation. The more you surrender, the more you begin to see the intelligence within the chaos. The emotions that once terrified you begin to reveal their purpose. Anger becomes clarity, fear becomes awareness, grief becomes compassion. The darkness transforms into light not by rejection, but by relationship. This transformation is not theoretical, it is felt in the body. The rebellion moves through physical sensations, the tightening of the chest, the heat of anger, the trembling of fear, the exhaustion of release. The body carries the history of repression, and as the shadow rises, that history begins to purge itself. It is a purification through embodiment. You begin to realize that healing is not about silencing the darkness, but giving it voice. Every time you allow yourself to feel what was once forbidden, a piece of your lost self returns home. The rebellion of the shadow also exposes the illusions of morality imposed by society. Much of what the world calls good is merely socially acceptable repression. People learn to behave, to conform, to appear kind and harmless, while their unacknowledged darkness leaks out in subtle cruelty and hypocrisy. The one who integrates their shadow no longer participates in that deception. They are not harmless, but they are whole. Their goodness comes not from obedience, but from understanding. They know their capacity for harm and therefore choose not to harm. Their empathy is not sentimental, it is born from depth. As the rebellion continues, you begin to notice a shift in perception. The world that once seemed divided into right and wrong, good and evil begins to blur into complexity, you see that everyone is fighting their own inner war. You stop expecting purity and start seeking authenticity. You understand that the only way to bring light into darkness is to enter it consciously. This awareness dissolves judgment, not out of moral relativism, but out of recognition that we are all fragments of the same unconscious trying to become aware of itself. The shadow's rebellion is not a crisis to be feared, but a rite of passage to be endured. It is the soul reclaiming its exiled fragments, the self breaking through the armor of repression. It demands truth, not perfection. It asks that you stop pretending to be only light and have the courage to include the night within you. Because the parts you once feared, the rage, the lust, the envy, the pride, are not your enemies. They are the imprisoned aspects of your own vitality, waiting for the moment when you are brave enough to release them from the dungeon of shame